All right, beautiful people, welcome back. We're going to finish reading. Well, not finish, we're going to continue. We're only like halfway through this book. So we're going to continue reading the book that will forever change your ideas about the Bible by Mauro Biglino, who was an ex-translator for the Vatican, translates Hebrew, cuneiform, Latin, all that good stuff, all the stuff that these historical documents were originally written in. And we're going to see what they really say when we translate them from their original language in which they were written. And we're going to throw all the manipulation out. We're going to throw all the false perceptions out that were being indoctrinated to everyone through the Christian church, the Catholic church, the governments, the religious institutions. Okay, the next chapter here is called Prophets and the Alien Machines. And in Hebrew, we got the Hebrew word there again. It sounds like it is pronounced Nevim or Neviim, Neviim. Again, if there's any Hebrew experts, I do apologize if I'm not pronouncing everything correctly. This is my first time reading a book where it has Hebrew words integrated into it. In our path characterized by the analysis of the literal meaning of some Old Testament passages, we have read chapters and verses being guided by the open-mindedness that is necessary to accept what appears as absurd UFOs in the Bible. I mean, that's not absurd to me. Like, remember the story of Ezekiel's wheel in the sky? Like, what the heck is a wheel in the sky? That's a freaking flying saucer. Like, he's just describing this stuff. Again, your third eye's got to be open, to be able to read the English version and connect the dots like this. So I understand why so many people just couldn't figure this stuff out. Impossible, pure fantasy inventions without basis. These are the comments of supporters of the religious doctrine who cannot accept the truths that call their beliefs into question. Yet things could be different from how they have been traditionally acknowledged. In the previous chapters, we analyze the figure of quote-unquote God, or rather gods, plural. Elohim is plural. Elohim in Hebrew is plural, gods. Gods with lowercase g's, not the source energy. We're talking about just other people, advanced people that set themselves up as gods, false gods. Gods as in the present, gods, it is presented in the sacred text. We have focused on the descriptions of angels and the way they act, and we have assessed the concreteness of concepts such as blessing, as well as the quote-unquote glory of God. Now we're about to go, or to do, a further daring step and read about what prophets have quote-unquote seen with their own eyes. Those who would speak on behalf of Yahweh have a special relationship with him and know the details and events that were denied to others. By way of introduction, we have to acknowledge that the Jewish scriptures, like in other sacred texts of an entire religious history of man, there are many descriptions of flying objects, precise descriptions, obviously written using the knowledge of the periods in which the text were edited. So again, what he's trying to say here is that back in the day, these people, when they wrote this, they didn't understand the technology. They didn't have words to describe the technology back then that we have today. An easily accessible example is that of the Native Americans who, not knowing about any kind of mechanical device, used phrase like horses of steel to define the early trains. They used their conceptual and linguistic paradigms to describe what they saw, a means of transportation made of metal. In the Middle East Semitic world, the Middle Eastern Semitic world was made of populations of living agro-pastoral areas where there was a mix of seasonal nomadism and a semi-sedentary attitude. These were people who did not have a specific terminology able to efficiently represent phenomena that was clearly out of the ordinary. Therefore, to describe what was other than a normal experience, they needed to use expressions pertaining to the everyday language. Accordingly, things and events regarding flight were inevitably described using the terminology inherent to the world of quote-unquote birds, and things that ran quickly through the air, or, let me read that again. And things that ran quickly through the air could only be described as a form of quote-unquote wind. And then in parentheses it says ruach, a term whose meaning has developed the value of quote-unquote spirit. That which issued some form of visible energy was defined as quote-unquote ardent or fiery. The sudden flashes of light reflections necessarily were quote-unquote lightning. Each roar, rumble, or noise generated by any means was identified with thunder, or the sound produced by a large mass of water. Any observational instrument, possibly round-shaped, became a quote-unquote eye, and so on. Free thinkers must therefore set out to read the following passages in this spirit and relying on this premise as obvious and useful in order to understand without being influenced by prejudices. The American astronomer Morris Jessup and Soviet scientist Mattis Agrest were among the first to argue that the scriptures contained episodes related to alien entities moving on unidentified flying objects, also known as UFOs. This fact has been officially and explicitly accepted by representatives of the Roman Church, as it is extensively documented in the paragraph entitled Church and the Aliens, which we will read on later. You know, there's another good book. It's called The Gods of Eden by William Bramley. And in fact, I uploaded, I think, the 4th chapter of that book on my YouTube channel, this one that you're on right now, if you want to go read into that. But that's another book that it just reaffirms everything that Mauro Biglino is trying to get across in this one. It's such a huge confirmation. We have all these different researchers from all over the world that speak different languages, all reaffirming the same exact thing. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah recalls quite clearly a nuclear explosion described by an observer of the time. The great energy produced by the explosion would have hit Lot's wife, turning her into a pillar of salt. It's funny that they mentioned this about the nuclear bomb technology. And this is also mentioned in The Gods of Eden by William Bramley, but he talks about in the Book of Mormon, 3 Nephi chapter 8, is a story of God dropping a nuclear bomb on the people because they were protesting. They were protesting against the government because remember the gods created the government, and then it describes a nuclear holocaust to a T. I mean, it's like the entire chapter of third Nephi 8. The entire 8th chapter in it is just describing a nuclear holocaust. It should be pointed out, however, that the traditional translation may not be correct, since the term melach, which is usually translated with salt, derives from the consonant root of the verb mlch. I'm not sure, milch, how to pronounce that. That indicates precisely the act of dissolving. So the verse could mean much more realistically that Lot's wife had literally dissolved because she was hit with the strong destructive heat generated by the event. Makes more sense to me. The patriarch Enoch is taken away by the Elohims in the apocryphal books of Enoch by narrative, The narrative is more accurate. He is brought into space by flying cars and meets astronauts, which aka angels, which show him the earth from above and some other white beings similar to men. We have already mentioned the strange way in which these two quote-unquote angels who were the guests of Lot defend themselves from the assault of the inhabitants of Sodom by blinding them. You know, if you ever read the book of Enoch, I haven't finished the entire thing, but I have read into it. In the book of Enoch, it's literally a story of extraterrestrials taking Enoch up into space on a ship, and then they show Enoch basically their inventory of weapons building materials, all the metals that are used in metallurgy and to create technology and to create weapons, like gold, silver, copper, iron, all the different metals that would be used in the production of weapons. That's what they show Enoch, the inventory of weapons building materials. All right, sorry, I lost my spot here. We have discussed the column of smoke and fire that by day is cloud-shaped and leads Moses and the Jews along their exodus through the Sinai desert. What are the objects described as, quote-unquote, a smoking furnace and the flaming torch that Abraham sees flying at night? That's referencing Genesis 15, verse 17. And what does the prophet Isaiah try to tell us in the various passages of his book that directly or not refer to the phenomenon of the kind suggested here, such as a cloud and smoke by day and the shining of a flaming fire by night? And what does Jeremiah refer to when he says, "Behold, he shall come up as clouds, and his chariots shall be as a whirlwind, with his horses are swifter than eagles," as well as other similar comments. I think it was David Hatcher Childress wrote a whole book, I think it was Chariots of the Gods, and it was all about the same stuff that we're talking about here. I think it was. Don't quote me on that. A keen reader can look up all the above quoted passages, among which we have only chosen to examine in detail those about the experiences of three prophets, Ezekiel, Elijah, and Zechariah. This choice is due to three specific reasons. The vision of Ezekiel is the most popular and, notwithstanding, a very significant part, and is always neglected, though very useful for a true understanding of the events. 2, the story of Elijah is never told in all its aspects and implications. And number 3, Zechariah's vision is only rarely mentioned and never highlighted, an aspect that links it to flying machines and the Guardian's land, which in Sumer and which is extraordinarily alive in the story. Now let's have a more detailed look at the stories of these three biblical prophets. Ezekiel, a name that means El is strong, was born around 620 BC, and though belonging to a priestly family, operated as a prophet. Exiled to Babylon in 597 BC, he settled in the village of Tel Aviv along the river of Kibar, or Kivar. His prophetic mission was restoring hope to the exiled people after the punishment for idolatry. Israel was to be reestablished, starting from the rebirth of the holy city of Jerusalem and the temple. The news about his life are scarce, and his activity was perhaps very contrasted. It is known indeed that on one side he enjoyed a great prestige because the elderly people often turned to him to handle important business. In parentheses, it says, even if sometimes they did not understand the content of his preaching or deliberately decided not to give him credit. Often, in order to draw his audience's attention, Ezekiel performed strongly symbolic actions. For example, he would eat bread baked with dung. He would lay on the same side of the body for long periods, He would be tied with ropes, and he would cut his hair with a sword. 5 years after the deportation, he had the vision described in the first chapter of the book that is named after him. The prophet says that while he was on the banks of the river of Kivar, and then again, this is what he says, and it's translated from Hebrew into English here. The sky opened, and I saw visions of Elohims. Let's start remarking that the unusual translation often summarizes this statement with the generic term divine vision. Quite different is the meaning expressed by the prophet who says said he saw the Elohims after the sky had opened. Actually, they are quote unquote visions, that is, a number of individuals. It is clearly described later on. Indeed, Ezekiel continues with the usual wealth of details that we have often noted in other passages, referencing Ezekiel 1 verse 4, and I saw. And then it's got all the Hebrew words here, the original translation in Hebrew, reconstructed into English. And I saw, and there was a wind of storm coming from the north, big clouds and fire striking each other, shone around him, and from its center there was a sparkle like an eye. Then the prophet states that this sparkle eye stands in the center of fire. The word translated as eye almost means something glowing, and the word translated as sparkle also indicates the amber or the electro. Sounds like those shining UFO orbs that people film all over the world with their cell phones now and upload to YouTube and Telegram. And in fact, one of my buddies filmed those. He's actually filmed those more than once. He filmed it one back in 2014 over the Ortega Mountains in California and got on the news for it. Then he filmed like another one over Las Vegas. We therefore have a description of what could be a real close encounter with a UFO. A storm cloud is coming from the north, and its storm, the fire of propulsion systems, rotates on itself. The luminous radiation all around, and at its heart, something bright as the electro. Sounds like a kind of a Mercury vortex engine or something. Perhaps this latter image was used to describe the color and luminescence of the central part, in parentheses, the electro was both natural and artificial, allow consisting of gold and silver, or perhaps it represents electromagnetic phenomena, since the electrical properties of the amber, in parentheses, that the Greeks defined as electron, were already well known in ancient times. Continuing with the analysis of Ezekiel's description, again, more Hebrew words. Creatures living, for, of, form, is, center, form, and that's reconstructed in the English words from Hebrew. And formed, its center appeared a form of 4 living creatures. And the appearance of the 4 living creatures was so characterized as follows, referencing verse 1, 5 through 17, or chapter 1, 5 through 17, which we will quote without a Hebrew text to make the reading less demanding, but at any rate, respecting the literalness and the shape of the original text. And we've got a whole bunch of bullet points here. In appearance, their form was that of an atom. Each of them had 4 phases and 4 wings. Their legs were straight, and the soles of their feet were like the soles of a calf's foot, and they sparkled like burnished bronze, luminescent. Under their wings, on their 4 sides, they had the hands of an atom. The term kanoph has several meanings: wing, tip, or edge. All 4 of them had faces: front, side, the wings, tips, and the edge. Their wings, or their tips, touched each other, or touched one another. And then it says, female to its sister, says verse 9. They did not turn as they moved, Each one proceeded in the direction of his face. Front side, each one went straight ahead. The four of them had the face of an Adam, and the face of a lion on the right side, the face of an ox on the left side, and the face of an eagle. Their faces and their wings were separated from the above. Their wings were spread out above. Each creature had two wings, each of which touched the wing of the other while two covered their bodies. Each moved straight ahead from the front side. Wherever the spirit would go, they went, without turning as they went. This sounds like some Project Blue Beam hologram stuff, which is also actually mentioned in the Book of Mormon. There's a section that describes these Anunnaki gods using holograms to trick people. The appearance of the living creature was like burning coals of fire or like torches. Fire moved back and forth among the creatures. It was bright, and lightning flashed out of it. The creatures sped back and forth, zigzagging in every direction like flashing or like flashes of lightning. Sounds like those little UFO orbs that people see. As I looked at the living creatures, I saw a wheel on the ground near beside each creature with its four faces front side. So there's again the reference to the wheel, which is probably describing a flying saucer, because flying saucers look exactly like a wheel. The appearance and structure of the wheel as tarsic eyes, they sparkled like precious stones, a chrysolite, and all four looked alike. Each appeared to be made as if it was a wheel in the middle of a wheel intersecting a wheel. So there was a wheel spinning. You had Mercury vortex engines. This is describing a Mercury vortex engine. As they moved, they would move in any one of the four sides, or the four sides directions the creatures faced. The wheel did not turn about as the creatures went. So a Mercury vortex engine is basically, it's like a torus-shaped compartment. Again, torus-shaped using sacred geometry, tapping into the electromagnetic fields of the universe, the ether. And what it does is according to like all the different whistleblowers and stuff I've looked up, this thing, when you spin this thing, if you get the formula right with the liquid metal mercury, because remember, liquid metal, it can exist in like a solid state, a gas state, and a liquid state, and all kinds of different states. It's like there's nothing else like it. Mercury is extremely unique. But you rotate the mercury in a torus-shaped compartment with the right formula, and it creates some kind of electromagnetic effect. And then this is how the Mercury vortex engine works: is it creates a bubble around everything inside of it, and then that bubble is no longer subject to third-dimensional phenomenon like G-forces and things like that. So that's how they're able to travel so fast and do right-angle turns, doing 5,000 miles an hour without killing all the passengers from the G-forces. We are undoubtedly faced with a surprising and detailed description made with the aim of describing very carefully what Ezekiel had seen after the sky had opened. It absolutely is no dream or vision, as they traditionally tell us. He is lying on the banks of a river. It is morning, and it starts with an impetuous of something that comes from a specific direction of north. Notice how almost obsessively the writer repeats that these living creatures would move in all directions without turning around, that is, rotating as normal objects do. Evidently, it was so unique and strange as to make an impression upon whoever was attending the event. Another important detail is that the description of the wheel within the wheel, which reminds us of flying saucers, depicted with a dome that looks like a wheel in the middle of a wheel. Curiosities, however, are still numerous. Let's go on reading Ezekiel 1 verse 18. The rims bending were tall of height and awesome. The rims bending of all four were full of eyes and round. These circles must have seemed mammoth, and all four were around equipped with the prophet called eyes, and that we would call a door, being sure not to use too much imagination. Verse 19:21 then describes for us some movements of this machine. And when the living creatures moved, the wheel beside them also moved. And when the living creatures rose from the ground, wherever the wind would go, they went. And when the wheels would rise at the sides along them, the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. Sounds like consciousness-assisted technology, or technology assisted by consciousness, which is what Stephen Greer describes in his documentaries like Unacknowledged and Sirius, all about the UFOs and the advanced technology being reverse engineered and covered up and hidden from humanity. Stephen Greer describes it as consciousness-assisted technology. When the creatures moved, they also moved, and the creatures stood still, they also stood still. And when the creatures rose from the ground, the wheel rose along with them, because the spirit of living creatures was in the wheel. Again, it's consciousness-assisted technology. I mean, even technologically speaking, like consciousness-assisted technology, like if you understand how the pineal gland works in a human body, well, what if you could install a pineal gland in a car or in an advanced flying machine? Then your consciousness could just, incarnate into it and then operate it. Just the same way it's our consciousness is incarnating into our bodies and we're operating the bodies. Well, who's to say that you couldn't build something? You couldn't build a flying saucer or some kind of transportation technology that had a pineal gland built into it in which you could incarnate into it and then take over it. So there are wheels moving with the whole of this, so there are wheels moving with the whole of this unidentified object, and along with it, they also rise and fall to the ground. The following verse 22 gives us the account of another very familiar feature. Again, we got some Hebrew words down here. Living creatures. These are the Hebrew words translated into English. Living creatures, life, of heads above, seamliness, shape, and. And then he's describing it with words like awesome, ice, of, I, like, dome, vault, above, up, from, their heads on, and right being. Reconstructed into English directly from Hebrew, according to Mauro Buglino, and above the heads of the living creatures, right on their heads from up above, was a vault or a dome shaped like an eye of the ice. That being was awesome. It is not difficult to consider that transparent domes above living creatures' heads as helmets, which in fact would make the creatures pilots. Verse 23 and 24 finally show the position of the wings and the noise produced by the movements. And we're going into some more bullet points here about the position of the wings and the noise and how they were produced by the movement. And under the vault, the dome, their wings were stretched out, one towards its sister, and each had two wings covering its body. I heard the sound, the voice or the roar of the wings like a roar of rushing waters. Like the voice, the roar or the sound of skiadai, or skiadi, a term that indicates the Elohim's power in and when they moved. Sound or voice or noise of tumult is the sound of an army. In when they stood still, they dropped and lowered their wings. Essentially, Ezekiel tells us that when they raised up or flew, the wings were spread and their movement produced a loud noise, and when they stood still, the wings lowered. We do not consider necessarily any additional comments on these verses. They are self-explanatory. Immediately after something happens that strikes the prophet, and we're referencing Ezekiel 1, verse 25 to 27 here, going into some more bullet points. And it was sound, a voice or a roar from up the vault, which is the dome, that was on their heads. And from above the vault, the dome, that over their heads, like apparition of sapphire stone, shape, guise of throne, and above form of throne form as appearance of Adam on it from up above. In short, form above the domes that was over the heads of the living creatures rises a chair-shaped structure or a throne onto which a creature which looked like man was seated. The prophet goes on describing all details and confesses to see something that had already struck him previously. He looked like a sparkle eye or electro amber, as if resembled a fire, house around him, meaning it surrounded him, from image of its waist and above, the image of its waist and above, I saw like image of fire and brilliant light surrounded him. The creature, likewise a man sitting at the controls, therefore issued a special light, perhaps recalling the color of the amber or the electro, a golden light. Then, with bright shadings, particularly evident in the lower part, the chapter ends with a statement that refers to the chapter dedicated to the kivod, namely the quote-unquote glory of God. So you guys remember what kivod and the glory of God really meant in the earlier chapters? Advanced flying technology that was capable of deploying weapons that struck terror into the hearts of people and that left people in awe. Ezekiel says in chapter 1, verse 28, like the image resemblance of the bow that is in the clouds on rainy days, so was the appearance of radiance around him. Again, we're going into some more Hebrew words here. It's like demute, mare, and hue, which translates to of image, of semblance, appearance, this, and it. And then we got Yahweh Kivod, or Kivod, Yahweh of Kivod. That's like the advanced flying weapons of God, of the gods, of the Anunnaki. It had the same image, semblance of Yahweh's Kivod. At this point, we reckon it is no longer possible to translate the term Kivod with quote-unquote glory, because what is described here only confirms that before Ezekiel, as before Moses, it was something big, powerful, and noisy, just as we found out in the chapter about glory of God. Here Ezekiel, just like Moses, describes in detail the elements that define what he was, or what he has doubtedly seen, was great and powerful. The kivod takes off. The prophet's book gives a further confirmation. After detailed descriptions of the machine, Ezekiel gives account of what the bright being with the image of Adam's tells him while seating on the throne. In parentheses, says we would say that the control bridge. After an interview, the prophet Ezekiel, and it's going into some bullet points here again, referencing the book of Ezekiel, I heard behind me the sound of loud rumbling and sound of the wings of living creatures brushing against one another, and sound of wheels beside them, and the sound like loud rumbling, and the wind lifted up and bore me away. Listening to Ezekiel, it seems here to hear the different sounds produced by flight instruments, wings or propellers, and the car wheels moving on the ground. We also sense a loud rumbling we have heard every time we are on a runway during the airplane takeoff, or we have had watched a television program on the early departures of NASA's space shuttles, and lands in the sanctuary of Jerusalem. Chapter 33 to 48 contain the final message of salvation for people who are in exile. There will be a new temple, a new cult, led by a priesthood, also renovated. In chapter 43, Ezekiel says that Elohim leads him on a high mountain. Hence, he shows the temple, then puts him before the door facing east. And here, and we're going into a bunch of Hebrew words translated here, Israel, of Elohim, of Kivod. East, the, of way by, came many water, of sound, like his sound, and, reconstructed into English, the keyboard of the Elohim of Israel came from the east and produced a sound similar to that of a large mass of water. Sounds like an engine. Here again we read of Elohim's flying machines and a big rumble. Ezekiel finally notes that this was the same vision as the one he had seen on the river of Kivar. The full text of Ezekiel refers to the events that the prophet has witnessed and has wanted to describe in detail flying machines guided by Elohims, and which land in various geographical locations, and that also function as a comparison element, just like one does for an ordinary storytelling. There are things that look alike or exactly alike that was seen in other places and other times. The next little section is called Dogmatic Prejudice. The accuracy of the editor of Ezekiel's book helps us to understand what has happened, and on the other hand allows us also to make a remark about the attitude of many traditional commentators who have defined the prophet as a wordy writer because it gets lost in detailed description. The dogmatic attitude finds everything useless that is not directly functional to the conception of God as established by religious thought. Of course, the dogmatic attitude finds everything useless because they're making billions of dollars off these people. Institutional religion, literally, it's like a $1 billion industry. Of course, they're going to find this useless. They don't want anything. They do not want this information getting out because all their followers are just going to fall off. They're going to see through all the BS. Evidently, Ezekiel, free from dogmatic ruling, did not consider it useless to dwell on the representations of Yahweh's chariot, which was, in fact, an expression and proof of his strength. Once again, we cannot fail to note that the traditional force exerted by those who live with the discomfort of reading what is not compatible with the tenets, or the tenets, does not allow a fair, positive approach to the content of the context, or of the text. This creates obvious difficulties for those who need to match the original text with preconceived religious thesis. First, brief concluding remarks. Finally, it must be said that Maimonides and Nahmanid, this name is hard to pronounce, Nahmanid, among the great Jewish commentators of the Old Testament who lived between the 12th and 13th century AD, claim that this part of the Bible, along with the chapter about creation, must be taught by a master to one, or at most, 2 disciples, because the knowledge contained in it had to be passed over to the very few elected. Clearly, the information herein contained was considered understandable only by a few previously prepared people. This is not difficult to believe, considering that today there are still many people who are not ready to accept these truths. Okay, the next part we're going to talk about Elijah. Elijah's life and activity is told in the books of Kings, or Kings 17, 1 and 2, and Kings 2:25. His name, Eliahu, meant El, my Yahweh, which is my God is Yahweh, and in fact worked as a prophet of this Elohim. So remember, Yahweh is Enlil from the Anunnaki, the ancient Sumerian Anunnaki history. Also, I also believe Yahweh and Lil is the same God in the Mormon Bible, because the mannerism of language and the way that he dictates and barks out orders is exactly the same. And he's also ordering people to go around and conquer other people's lands. In fact, the first book of Mormon, the book of Nephi, is who I believe is Yahweh and Lil, instructing Nephi to go and steal the genealogy records from this guy named Laban. And then when Laban doesn't comply, Nephi goes back later, cuts off his head, and then takes him and brings him back to Enlil Yahweh. Remember, genealogy is very important because these gods were all about genetic engineering. So the DNA, anything with DNA genealogy, very important. In fact, you go to Salt Lake City, the main city for Mormonism. There's a giant genealogy vault built into the mountain that's designed to withstand a nuclear holocaust. No visitors are allowed, no tourists, no one. It's under 24-hour surveillance. They don't mess around when it comes to DNA and genealogy. Where do you think they got that from? The Anunnaki and their genetic experiments. He is considered one of the greatest prophets of the entire Old Testament, born in Tisbe of Gilead. He carried out his mission during King Ahab's kingdom, 9th century BCE. We recall his successful challenge launched against Baal's priests, prophets on Mount Carmel, precisely on El Muraka, southeast of the mountain range, along the stream Kison. Elijah killed 450 of these prophets. Yeah, there it is again, God going around telling his people to murder everyone. He also has been attributed to some of the extraordinary facts. The proliferation of oil and flour and the resurrection of the son of widow of Seraphiah near Sidon, the lightning of Pyre erected with drenched wood, thanks to Yahweh's fire descended from the sky. The same fire claimed by the prophet came down from the sky to incinerate 2 missions of 50 soldiers that King Ahaz had sent against him, guilty of criticizing his behavior. While in a cave on Mount Horeb, the mount where God used to dwell during the exodus from Egypt, he stood at the arrival of Yahweh, who ordered him to stay on the mountain during his passage. The arrival, and then it asks the question in parentheses, landing? Is the arrival a landing? Is accomplished by all the usual phenomenon we already know well. Strong wind, earth shaking, fire, and then a gentle breeze. All right, the next little section here is called the rapture of Elijah. The episode that concerns us, however, in chapter 2 of the second book of Kings, is known as the rapture of Elijah. This is an event that modern terminology might define as a true abduction, a kidnapping at the hands of the aliens. Again, in the Book of Mormon, Joseph Smith has 4 encounters with what he thought was God, and every single one of them describes a UFO abduction to a T. It's very funny. You read the Book of Mormon, it's filled with all kinds of stuff just like this. The term rapture may not be appropriate here because what happened was consciously known in advance by the prophet Elijah. He was also accompanied by his followers who were also made aware of what was about to happen. We see the episode in detail in 2 Kings 2, verse 1. The chapter begins with the departure of Elijah and his disciple Elisha, with the SH, from the city of Gilgal, which is, and we've got the Hebrew translations here, Elijah in Hebrew, Yahweh, lift, when in, which looks like it's pronounced halo ba, and then whirl the with, in, looks like it's pronounced sirah ba. Reconstructed into English, when Yahweh lifts Elijah with a whirlwind. The prophet calls on his young followers to say, telling them that Yahweh has ordered him to go to Bethel, the house of El, alone, but Elisha refuses to obey and follows his master. Once there, they find other disciples that tell the prophet Elisha, "You may know that the day when Yahweh was taking your Lord from above, from head, and he said, also I know." And it's given us the Hebrew translations for that sentence right there. So there is no doubt that all are aware of what was to happen in the text shows that they also know when, in parentheses today, Yahweh is going to take up the prophet. Elijah and Elisha go then to Jericho, and here are the disciples who are aware of the impending departure of Elijah. The two start again towards the Jordan, followed by 50 disciples who, however, keep at a distance after crossing the river. Elijah asked Elisha, "Ask what I will do for you before I will be taken from you." And it gives us the very specific Hebrew words that were used to translate that, again, above here. Elisha asked for the double portion 2/3, in parentheses says, of the spirit of the master can be put in him, and he has answered that this will be possible if he will be able to see it while he is being taken. Verse 11 tells us that the arrival of the celestial chariot, while the two are walking and talking. And again, it's Hebrew here, again, translated esk, fire, suzevi of horse, and esk rekev, or rekev, fire of chariot. Here and to them between divided and, reconstructed into a complete sentence here. And there is the chariot of fire and horses of fire that divide the two of them. So the fiery chariot pulled by quote-unquote horses of fire, remember the Native Americans, horses of steel, interpossessed between the two who are walking, and, again, Hebrew translations here, and Elijah went up into the sky with the whirl. I mean, if that doesn't describe an alien abduction, I don't know what the heck does. The episode is therefore clear. Elijah ascended into the sky in a chariot, and this removal was expected and well known by all the disciples who were in the area among Bethel, Jericho, and Jordan River. Whether this is real physical elevation is then confirmed by the following verses, which are not normally given the importance that they actually have in helping us understand what really happened. They tell exactly what Elisha did, and above all, what his followers thought to do. First, Elisha, and again, we're going into bullet points. This is from Elisha's point of view. Watching, no longer saw him. He grabbed his clothes and tore them in two. He picked up the mantle and fell from Elijah. He got back. He stopped at Jordan. The disciples who had previously kept away from the scene see him coming, run over to him, and tell him they want to go back and look for Elijah because, I've got some more Hebrew translations here, Yahweh of wind, him got it perhaps, and we got the words for mountains, of one, him through, has, and valleys, of one in, or, and then reconstructed in English, perhaps the wind of Yahweh has taken him up and thrown him on a mountain or in the valley. So it looks like his disciples saw this and they were freaked out, and they're like, what the heck, we got to go find him. Is he okay? I mean, that's just how that translates to me. What they had witnessed was real. The wind of Yahweh, whose probable meaning we have already examined in the opening of this chapter, took Elijah and physically could have him dropped or could physically have dropped him somewhere in the surrounding area consisting of mountains and valleys. At first, Elisha orders them not to carry out any search, but then yields to the entreaties of his followers. The search takes 3 days, but with no results. Elijah has permanently disappeared, brought to heaven by the chariot of Yahweh. So this is an announced event, known in advance by the involved parties, and therefore planned by the Elohim, who had decided to take Elijah with them. As usual, the episode's concreteness is documented with many details furnished by the story, the journey, the encounters with the prophet's disciples who address surprised questions to Elisha, the crossing of the Jordan, along with the followers keeping away from the place where the event is about to occur, the two walking when the chariot interposes, and finally, the search for Elijah due to the concreteness of the event. One does not search for 3 days, laboring over hills and dales to search for someone who has been kidnapped just in a vision or dream. Next section is titled The Abduction of Enoch. The privilege of traveling on the Elohim's machines was not exclusively Elijah's. In fact, the patriarch Enoch had already had the chance. Enoch was the 6th descendant of Adam on the genealogy of the Sethite son of Jared. He in turn fathers Methuselah, Noah's grandfather, according in Genesis 5:22 to 24 writes. And Enoch walked back and forth with the Elohim. After having generated the Methuselah, 300 years, and begot sons and daughters. And all days, whole time, Enoch was 365 years. And Enoch walked back and forth with the Elohim. And no more was he, because Elohim took him away. So Enoch would have gone away with the Elohim without dying. The tradition was evidently widely known and accepted, as it was retrieved in Siracide 44:16, in the New Testament epistle to the Hebrews 11:5. It would sound inappropriate to speak of kidnapping because the text says twice that Enoch walked with the Elohims, and the verb follows a particular order which underlines the intensity and repetitiveness of the action. For this reason, the meaning can be effectively represented with the walking back and forth. In short, the author tells us that it was a constant and repeated action. Moreover, the book of Genesis is very brief in describing the story, which instead is told in great detail in the apocryphal books of the patriarch. The latter describes the trips he makes accompanied by the angels called vigilantes, a term that recalls the Sumerian guardians and the Egyptian Netiru. We briefly analyze them. Enoch ascends into the sky in a wonderful home where he meets God's great glory. He is taken to various places, including even underground. He flies in a deserted village dominated by fire. He then moves in different directions towards the ends of the earth. He gives a series of astronomical knowledge about the order of the cosmos, he is given a series of astronomical knowledge about the order of the cosmos, the sun, the moon, and its phases, the lunar year, the winds, which were widely available to the Elohims since they were space travelers. Second brief concluding remark. We deliberately stop here, not considering any further the apocryphal texts, because the commitment is to use the text officially accepted by the Christian religion that, as such, are held to be true, justified, and quote-unquote inspired by God, even if suspiciously altered not to accept what they as simply and clearly tell us the Elohim moved on flying machines. All right, next we're going to talk about Zechariah. Zechariah is included among the so-called minor prophets, defined as such only on the basis of the quantity of text attributed to them. Therefore, it is not a qualitative assessment. Indeed, it could not be so, since careful and compared readings of the Gospels attests that the prophet Jesus based the most part of his own preaching and on the doctrine of such predecessors whom he often cited. Zechariah, whose name means Yahweh has reminded, belongs, along with Haggai and Malachi, to the group of prophets of the Persian age at the end of the 6th century BCE. In the book attributed to him, the prophet tells firsthand the visions, which can be summarized as follows. Being on the bay horse, which we discussed in the chapter of the Malachims, 4 horns and 4 craftsmen, also artisans, a man with a string to measure the city of Jerusalem, purification of priests and Zerubbabel's promise of rebuilding the temple, the candlestick with 2 olive trees, the Megillah, which is a scroll, and the flying ephah or ephah, referring to book of Zechariah 5, 1 through 11. 4 flying chariots between the 2 mountains of copper. We will consider the last 2 blocks because they are particularly significant. We can at once dismiss. Now, what was read is a result of a dream or vision, since a little bit earlier the prophet in Zechariah 4:1 states, "The Malach talking with me returned and woke me as the man who is awakened from his sleep." With this clarification, which generates that the prophet was certainly wide awake, we now look at Zechariah 5, verse 1 through 11. The Megillah and the ephah, unidentified flying objects. It says right here, speaks in first person and says, and it's given us the Hebrew translation, "And I returned and raised my eyes." To return and do something is a Hebrew phrase often used to say that you did something again. Therefore, the real meaning of the expression is, I raised my eyes again. Then he goes, and here I saw a flying cylinder. The Malach asks him what he is seeing, and he answers, I am seeing a flying cylinder or a flying roll. You know, people still see those today, the cigar-shaped, cylinder-shaped UFOs. Like, people film them with their cell phones and post them all over. Like, people have seen them tons and tons of times. The term Megillah indicates a scroll, a rolled-up papyrus book, in short, any cylindrical object. And so the scene is clear. The prophet is wide awake, raises his eyes, and sees a flying cylinder. He has no doubt, to the point of confirming it to the Malach, who asks the question. The object then is so concrete and real that Zechariah even specifies its size, which translated in Hebrew says, its length was within 20 cubits and its width was in 10 cubits. The cubit had a length of about 50 centimeters or 18 inches. So we have a flying cylinder approximately 30 feet long and 15 feet wide. Then when Zechariah is invited once again to raise his eyes and look at what is approaching, but this time he asks the angel Malach the same question, and the latter replies that it is taking off, or that is a taking off. Taking off ephah, there's that word again, E-F-A-H. The ephah was the unit of measurement for grain and corresponded to about 40 liters of flour, roughly the size of one bushel. At this point in the story, one wonders what exactly this object, or exactly was this object of apparent daily usage that could actually be coming out with autonomous movement. Verse 7 makes the whole thing clearer. Again, Hebrew constructed back into English here. Here is coming a ring or a disc of lead raising in the sky, and this only woman sitting inside the ephah. The Malach then closes the disc of lead, and the scene is further enriched by the arrival of two more female creatures. In order to see them, Zechariah has to look up once more. And there was wind on their wings. So these two flying women, they rose the ephah in between the earth and the sky. So after the flying cylinder, Zechariah sees box or containers with a lead disc cover, or a trap. A trap that opens and shows a woman sitting inside. He then sees two more women arrive flying, and they raise in the air in this unidentified object. At this point, the prophet asks where they are taking him, and that Malach answers. And again, this is Malach answering in Hebrew. How he answered in Hebrew translates to build for her a house in the land of Shinar, and over there it will be prepared its place. The unidentified object holding a woman arrives flying, is lifted by two flying female beings, and is taken to the land of Shinar, where it will land or be left on a platform that has been prepared in the meantime. Do we have doubts whether to call it a UFO or unidentified flying object in its precise meaning? Another curiosity is that Shinar is a term used in the Old Testament to identify the land of Sumer. We therefore have a direct relationship of these objects and flying beings with the land that they saw them come first, that hosted them, and from where they later moved, the country of the guardians, flying gods, the Anunnaki, those who described from heaven to earth, or those who described as who descended from heaven to earth. A very remarkable coincidence among flying machines, the beings who guide them and land from where they came. The flying chariots. Then Zechariah speaks of having to look above and thus witness a further extraordinary event. And it's telling us how it was, written in Hebrew. Outcoming chariots, 4. Mountains, the, of, to, between, from, bronze, of, mountains, and the, and, reconstructed into a complete sentence here. 4 chariots coming out from in between the two mountains, and the mountains were mountains of bronze. The prophet tells us about 4 chariots coming out from in between 2 mountains, towers, silos, or ramps, undoubtedly made of metal. Each chariot was driven by quote-unquote horses of various colors, and the Malach explains that these are 4 winds of the sky that are generated by standing before or being in the presence of the Lord of the Lord of the whole earth. They move in direction of all 4 cardinal points. The Malach, who is speaking with the prophet, orders that they cover the whole earth or the whole country as to making a sort of reconnaissance. Curiously, the same verse describes the 4 objects as reddish, the definition that could refer to either as metallic, sheen, or perhaps the propulsion system. Obviously, we have no certainty, but the reference to the color was undoubtedly significant. Okay, third, and it says here third, the third brief, and also says and the last in parentheses. Concluding consideration. This is the literal translation of Zechariah's visions that describe the flying objects of various kinds: a cylinder of 30 feet long and 15 feet wide, an object containing a woman, 2 flying women moving towards the land of Sumar, and 4 chariots emerging from in between 2 high vertical metal elements. There is no need to add further comment, but we do wonder if this does not match significantly to Sumerian stories that describe the Anunnakis moving throughout the sky on their flying machines, like those that, on the eve of the flood that disrupts the earth, meet and the meet and the landing field, get on their celestial boats and remain safe while watching the entire event. Are the flying machines used to escape the disaster the same as those we analyze here seen before as prophets? We cannot say for sure, but we can neither pretend not to know. We cannot dismiss the legitimate questions that our curiosity asks compellingly. We cannot erase such concreteness by relegating it to the unknown world of visions or dreams. We cannot ignore with a pen stroke the dogmatic pedantry what these authors meant to fix in the memory through the written word. We cannot forget that the aforementioned Rashi of Troyes used to say that the words of the Old Testament may be interpreted with 70 different meanings, but there is one that surely must have the literal one. And here the literal meaning is of amazing clarity, a clarity which curiously recalls what would happen in the case of trips made in accordance with the theories of physicists W.J. von Stockham, Frank Tipler, and Alan Wolf, which can be summarized as the follows. A cylinder, the Megillah, creates a powerful space-time warp used by other flying objects in order to travel long trajectories. Quite an attractive match. Okay, that's the end of that chapter. So we'll continue the next chapter entitled The Elohim's Die. We'll continue this chapter in another upload.